On this episode of Still Loading, Life in the Analog Age. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, we are continuing our conversation with Gabe Swarr. Gabe is an animation producer and cartoonist who has most recently worked on the Animaniacs reboot as the executive producer for that show. He has also worked for Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and has done a number of amazing things, but the reason I have him on the show is that he made his own Game Boy game, and he's also a retro gaming enthusiast. So if you want to hear the first part of this conversation, you're going to have to go back to last week's episode and listen to the first half of it. I sat down with him. We recorded a 2 hour and 45-minute podcast, so I figured split it up into 2 episodes. And so without further ado, let's continue on with my conversation with Gabe Swarr. In a complete non sequitur transition and one of the worst transitions ever. We've been talking so much about, and I've loved this. This is I like having these types of conversations, but I also want to talk about your Life in the Analog Age. Let's talk about that for a little bit. So Life in the Analog Age was a series of web comics that you did, and you also turned them into little animated shorts. And like I said at the beginning of the episode, the way I found you was that you did a Life in the Analog Age Game Boy game. So just talk about it. Like, what was your inspiration for Life in the Analog Age?
Yeah, I was working at Nickelodeon on The Adventures of El Tigre. It was a show in the early 2000, like mid 2000 or 2006, 2007, around there. Mm-hmm. And I had a bunch of really super talented friends. Like all the people I hang out with, they're amazing cartoonists, and I don't know what it is about this, but I could talk about this for a long time, but no one does any work after hours. I think animation's hard, especially storyboarding in animation. It's the most labor intensive job in animation by far, because you're just drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing. So people come home, they want to stare at the TV or literally stare at a wall and not even think about animation or think about drawing because they're exhausted. But my dad was a package designer, but he was a painter, right? It's his passion is painting, on canvas with acrylic and everything, right? So he would go to work and then come home and he would paint at night. And growing up and seeing that influenced me to okay, I want to be like that person who comes home and works on their own stuff, So my career, my entire animation career, I've made that a point to really come home and make that a priority to work on my own stuff, be it comics, cartoons, or whatever,
Yeah.
So I was like, I want to do another, I published a couple comics. I did a couple pilots earlier in my career. And at that time, when I was doing that show, I was like, that's all I was working on was that show, of Tigre. And I was like, I want to do another comic, but I want to do it online. This is right when web comics are getting kind of big,
Mm-hmm.
and people are actually making money on them. And I was like, what if we got 5 friends together and just all did a comic a week and then put them up every weekday? So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I literally said, hey guys, what do you think about doing this? I'll put the site together and everything, but we got to be in it together. It's not going to work if people slack off. 1 comic a week. That's it. It could be 4 panels. That's fine,
Mm-hmm.
But as everybody became very ambitious and that they started falling behind schedule and it turned into a big mess. But other than that, we started doing these comics together, and I was doing a comic called Big Pants Mouse, and I was being very smart about I just want to do 4 panels, right? And that's what I did. And then I was like, I want to do something. At the time I wasn't doing any more storyboards and I wasn't doing any directing. So basically you go in, you start the way TV animation works is you kind of go in, you start as a revisionist, if you want to do storyboards, right? Or even a director. You start as a revisionist, you learn how storyboards works, you become a storyboard artist, you be a storyboard artist for a long time. Then you move up to directing. That's where you're supervising the storyboards. And then you move into the supervising director, where you supervise the directors. then you move into being a producer. And at that time, I moved into being a producer. So I wasn't drawing as much. So I actually would go home and like have energy to work on my own stuff.
Makes sense.
And my wife and I, sorry, this is like the longest explanation ever
No,
for this.
by all, this is interesting, man. Keep going.
So my wife and I would go for walks at night, and she would always ask me about stuff as a kid, because she grew up in Tijuana, and she's a little younger than me, just 3 years, 4 years younger, and we had really similar stories, but it was completely different culturally, right? And
Yeah.
now living in California, I am very nostalgic for like the time before the internet, and my childhood specifically was like it was very. I grew up in the farmlands of Pennsylvania, and there was nothing to do, like I said, and I remember laying in my wagon when I was a kid and coming home from school, pulling the wagon out, laying in my wagon, and just watching the leaves fall because there was nothing else to do. Like there was cartoons, like they had one cartoon after school and that was it, or whatever, like Thundercats or whatever, and that was it. After that, you had nothing to do, and so the more I told these stories, they kind of turned into like these little tiny vignettes of all the stuff, and like I was always a really big fan of Calvin and Hobbes.
I can see that I can see that influence in those. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a totally kind of different beast, but like that those stories of being Calvin and like imagination and going out in the woods and playing and stuff like that. And it's I remember Calvin and Hobbes being a very sweet comic, but then going back and reading it now, it's not. It's like kind of, you know, uh,
He's a bit
from
of a
the
rambunctious
mouth of
kid.
babes,
Yeah.
like it's like he's like saying, that's the whole twist on that. And so I started like coming up with all these stories, and I was like, I want to do my own Calvin and Hobbes. It's not like we had this site where it was all funny comics and stuff, right? And I was like, I was really scared about making this comic, Life in the Analog Age, for that website because I didn't think that people would care. When they see that style, they think it has to be hilarious, it has to be funny, because that's just the way I draw. I draw like really appealing. I draw really like goofy faces, and like that's the
Hmm.
stuff I love, like Looney Tunes and stuff. But like, there's an artist called Osamu Tezuka who created Astro
Astro
Boy.
Boy. Yeah.
Yeah, and he draws really cute stuff. But his whole career, he started off by doing just like uh, he would draw really cute, but then he had these like really deep moral stories of morals and ethics and all this stuff, and it's like it taught me to go like, well, you don't have to. That style isn't just. I could tell those kinds of stories too because I draw like cute and appealing and funny faces, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like hilarious.
Hmm.
So I did a couple shorts, like a little tiny little animated trailers for the comic. So when the comic hit, I was really nervous, and it didn't have the biggest following, but people really liked it, and people were really connecting to it emotionally. Like I decided to do like the circuit for like doing like comic cons and stuff like that,
Yeah.
right? Just
Yeah.
like independent comic cons and stuff. And I would get a table, and everyone else had these comics that were like really popular, and mine wasn't popular at all. But like I would always have that one or two fan that would come up and like just I would start talking to them, and they would just go crazy because it's my voice that's in the cartoons, and they'd be
Yeah.
like, "Oh my gosh, like that's you! I can't believe that!" And I was like, "Yeah, that's all me. I mean, it's like I'm the only one who does it." And they really would connect emotionally, and like that's kind of where it came from. That's like those walking around talking to my wife and coming up with these little stories and like really being nostalgic and figuring out like what made my childhood different than her childhood or like the way my life is now. It's very fast and jam packed full of like everything is just more condensed. I don't know if that's how it just gets when you're older, but right now, I mean, it just feels like everything's like faster and busier and like
You
like
have
I
less time
wanted to
for
slow
yourself.
down. It's like animation is that. I mean, it's like moving. You're literally working less than slow motion. Like there's those shorts were like a minute, 2 minutes at the most. They would take me a month to do like one, and after hours, or I got to the point where I could do one in a couple of weeks because I was just putting in more time. But
Yeah.
that's I mean that's it's slowing down, and it's I don't know. That's a really long explanation. I'm
Well, it was kind
sorry.
of like the way you're kind of describing it. Think it sounds almost like a reset button. It was to help you kind of readjust to, or like kind of take back a little bit of yourself during this fast paced, energetic work that you have, and having to work in Hollywood and in animation in the industry and whatnot, because I don't know that sometimes when life's really chaotic and it's going so insane, you just need something to slow it down so you can breathe. Not you don't maybe not even solve a problem, but just so you can breathe and take time. um and without like going into any personal details for myself, but like that's kind of what podcasting is for me. Like it's the hustle and bustle of the world, but then every once in a while I get to sit down, have a conversation with someone like you, and just kind of shoot the shit for an hour and a half, and just kind of
Yeah.
like like let everything else kind of like, I don't have to worry about work, don't worry about bills right now, don't worry about the next thing I have to do. Just I'm in this conversation in this moment. So I feel like finding a personal creative endeavor, whether it's podcasting, which I loosely classify this as creative. It's just me bullshitting, but at least, but
Well,
like,
you're telling a story. I mean, you're literally like shaping this conversation and you're telling a story. It's like you can there's such a thing as horrible interviews, and this is not a horrible, well, I don't know if it's a good interview or not because I ramble, but like
I'm
you're doing
enjoying
a good job
this.
of like telling the story, you know?
Well, I'm enjoying this. But like for the way you describe it is that this was your way to kind of slow down life and let you kind of also take stock of like how you got to where you were.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, um, and I did realize that I had all these little tiny vignette type of stories to tell, and I tried, like, I do have some longer ones written, and I still want to do. Um, I went to church camp when I was a kid, like every year for it was youth camp, and it was
Hmm.
from I think it was fifth or sixth grade until like the whole way through high school, right? Like
Hmm.
1 week every summer. And some of my favorite memories, like I met one of my closest friends there, and my brother went there, and there was like a whole thing where like I was there first, and then he came in, and he was there the same week, and then I was
That's
like, you can't,
that
we're
is
not gonna be
the
friends, and like all this stuff, because I have my friends and you have your friends, that's just the way it is,
I was here
and
first. You can't
exactly.
take what I have.
And
I was like that with my little brother too.
and I guess that's just a big brother little brother thing, but like I always wanted to do a whole comic series about that, like a long form graphic novel, and I still have a lot of stuff written for that, but it's like it's kind of the same type of thing I'd love to do when I write that, is like they're just vignettes, but when you put it all together into one thing, you start to see like this overarching story. It's kind of like making a weird documentary or something. Like you're kind
It's
of like
almost like
piecing all these things together,
it's almost like these are the outline of a book you're going to write later. You know what I mean? Like this, all these little comic strips and shorts, that the little vignettes that you've created, you can eventually take back and look at it in a macro perspective, be like, oh, this is the story that I didn't see because I couldn't find, I forget the stupid freaking expression is, but you can't see the forest through the trees through the forest, or
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah,
is that?
whatever that is. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, though? It's something like
Exactly.
that. So it's kind of
You only
like,
see the pieces of the whole, basically.
yes. And then once you can see all the pieces at once, you're like, oh, okay. Uh, so that's cool. That would be awesome to see. I mean, that would be a shitload of work, but that would be really cool to see.
Well,
Um,
so the game, like,
yes, I was about to actually ask about that. Let's transition right into that.
so yeah, so in my career, like I've always wanted to do games. Like I just thinking about a lot lately by making this game, right? Like uh NES, right? Like the NES, like I love platformers, right? And then I distinctly remember as a kid reading in magazines about games, and there was no information, period. There was I remember seeing one image of one person at a computer, and it was one of the artists working on Super Mario Brothers 3, and they had a program and they were filling in the pixels for like the Mario sprite, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, that's awesome. That's in Japan. I don't even know what I'm looking at. I have that's completely inaccessible to me. And I thought like the only way you could make games is learning programming, right?
Mhm.
And um, and talking to friends, yeah, that's the way that they got into games, was like learning programming, being really good at math. When I had that VIC 20 when I was a kid, I sat down and I put in a program where it was supposed to be a bird flying, right? Like that was the
Mhm.
program. I swear to God, I sat down for like 2 hours, typed in the whole program, and all it was like open bracket, close bracket, like 100 of them on the screen just changing. I'm like, this is not a bird flying. Like, this is not worth it. Like, it's not worth it, right? So like as I went through my career, I that was the decision. I was like, okay, animation is where like I know I can do this. I know there's books on this. There's people I could talk to, or at least artists that I know, like my dad, like he does art for a living. This is a career. Like I know I could do this. I don't know anything about games. I don't know anybody that even has anything to do with it. I don't even know where they're made because at the time it was like the industry crashed like in mid 80s.
Yep,
And then
83.
90s was like it was all Japanese games. I mean, there was the most popular games I even loved were all in Japan. I was like, what do I have to do? Like learn Japanese? Can't do that. And it's Japan. Like I don't know anything about that, you know?
Yeah.
So ever since that point, I was like animation, right? So whole career animation, but at the same time, first check I got, like the very first check I got on my first job at Spumco, I went to Funko Land, I ordered from Funko Land, I got an NES, and I ordered like 10 games that I always wanted. When I remembered from my memory, not even doing any research, because even the internet was kind of janky back then, you know?
Yeah.
Like it was like Metal Storm, Bionic Commando,
Ooh.
like it was like Mega Man 3, like it was all these like games.
Do you
Super
still
Mario
have Metal
Brothers.
Storm?
What?
Do you still have that copy of Metal Storm?
Of course, yeah.
Good man, because that's worth a lot of money now.
Yeah, I know. And
It's worth
and
a lot
I
of
bought
money.
it for $12. Like and I bought all that stuff. It was $70. I remember getting the box. I remember opening it. I was 21 and I sat down and I was like, this is the greatest day of my life. Like now I can afford to get these games that I sold. I mean, at the time it was only like 5 years before that or whatever, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Like
Yeah.
because at that time, that's when the N64 was out. It was like 2 generations prior, you
And if
know?
you think about it, that was a quarter of your life. If you were 21 when you did that, 5 years prior was literally a quarter of your life
That's true.
prior. Like
Yeah.
that's a long time.
Yeah. And so like ever since then, like even my entire career with animation, like I had times where I would get to work on games. Like I was at Spumco, we worked on 2 games. One was called Project Morico, which was like a really weird game in Japan for the PlayStation. It was only released in Japan.
Okay.
And it was like a weird acting simulator where you had a microphone and you would be in the scene and you would act out a scene and it was kind of like
How do you spell Mariko, by the way? Do you know?
Mariko, Morico.
I'm gonna try to look that up.
Yeah, we did all the artwork for it because like in Japan at Spumco, like they were really big fans of John, so they sought John out to design these games. And one creator was a big fan of John, so because it was the same time around, like right before that was like uh, Parappa the Rapper
Mhm.
was like designed by that cartoonist Green, I think is Greenblatt or whatever. He was an American cartoonist, you know,
Okay.
and then because the Japanese developers really liked, I guess they just liked that American cartoonist, they based the whole game on his style. I think that's they're kind of thinking for John too, like I want to make a Spumco video game, you know, it hasn't been done yet, so let's go to John. So we did this game called Morico. We also did another game called Go Go Hyper Grind. It was a skating game for the GameCube. It was
Okay.
these games were not, they're really weird, and Go Go Hyper Grind is not a good game, but like I got to design all the characters for that game. It was great. Like it was tons of fun to work on that stuff.
Wow.
But games like they just get more and more complicated as time went on. And you know, I always wanted to do my own game. You know, and
Yeah.
uh, I'm sorry, this is such the longest way to get to the
Dude, don't
answer your
worry about
question. I'm
it.
sorry.
No. This is. Now I'm like looking into. I'm like, what else? Like, I didn't even know that Spumco did. I mean, one because I didn't watch Ren and Stimpy, so I never really looked into it. But I didn't even know that was the name of the animation company or the production company for Ren and Stimpy was Spumco. What a
Yep.
ridiculous name, but awesome name at the same time.
Well, there's a whole other. I have a bunch of crazy stories too. Like that experience was not the best experience, but anyway, back to games, right? Um, I'm sorry, this is a totally other story, but like
Don't
I was
worry
at
about it.
Nickelodeon in development 5 years ago, and I brought Mike Micah in. Um,
Okay.
we I was in this. It was called the Artist Collective, right? And what it was I was in an overall deal. An overall deal is like a development deal where they lock you in for like a year, right? And they say just pitch everything you make for that year or you help out with, you're ours. Like we bought your brain for this year, right? So we want to
Okay.
get a show out of you. here's like, we're going to pay your salary for a year. You can't work anywhere else. And all you're doing is pitching ideas to us all the time. Right. So I pitched like an interactive game, because at the time Nickelodeon online, like they were doing these like interactive, they wanted to do like interactive stuff. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I pitched a cartoon that it was like more cartoon and then like a mini game, and then cartoon and then a mini game. So it's almost like opposite of a normal game where it was like a game and then a cutscene and then a game and a cutscene. It was kind of like
Yeah.
flipping that, and you couldn't advance the story without getting through the mini game, right? So it was kind of like, and the mini games were like WarioWare type of games, right?
Okay, okay.
And it was always based on like the plot, right? It was called Robo Burger, right? And it turned out really great, but like my friend Mike Micah, who was on your show, like we were friends for years and years and years, and I brought him into the Artist Collective and to talk, and that's how he got into glitch text and everything. Like that's like I brought him in to
That
meet
show on
everybody, and
Netflix
then
now, yeah.
yeah, exactly, and I worked on that show too. Like I was a creative consultant and stuff for that. But like my point was, is like every single time in my career, like I always get to the point where like I get to do a cool game type of thing, but I never have a chance to like do it by myself. Like the
Mm-hmm.
closest I got was RoboBurger. It was Mike and I, and he had one other person working with him, I think. And we did the whole, like, I had an animation studio doing the animation, but I was doing all the sprites for the game, and Mike was doing the programming, right? So it was like the smallest crew that I ever got to work on my own type of thing. And then I saw this thing, Game Boy Studio, or GB Studio, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a kind of like a game maker type of thing. And I started watching YouTube videos, and I'm like, wow, this looks like very simple. And now that I'm in quarantine and I have all this time because I'm not commuting, I
Yep.
mean, I don't have, I still have like very intense days, but like there's times in between meetings I could grab, or like since I don't have to drive to a post house to like watch mixes and stuff like that, I have a little more time, and I don't have to drive to work anymore. I just work from home. I'll just use all this time, and we can't go out. My wife and I can't go out. Like we're in LA, we just can't do anything.
Yeah.
And because we choose not to. We want to keep ourselves safe and other people safe. Um, so I just said, well, now's the time to do it. Like I haven't done Analog Age for a while. It's the perfect thing because with GB Studio at the time, you could only do RPGs. And I'm like, this is the perfect thing. I started learning pixel art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Mike first, and I was like, I want to make a game. Like we've been talking about this forever. Let's just you and I make a game, and we'll make a demo, and we'll do it, right? And so we started this demo, and he just got too busy, and I was like, screw it, I'm going to do GB Studio. I'm going to make my own game, right? And I grabbed Analog Age, and I started just screwing around, and I came up with like I just learned it myself. It's not hard. It's kind of like visual. It's like visual programming where it's logic. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's all like if this then that, and you make variables, and the way you make, like, I'm not a big RPG fan at all, like I've already said, but
Yeah.
like I just found it's another way to tell a story. Like out of the whole thing, it just feels like it's a different way to tell a story.
I definitely got that. Like the I loved the puzzle aspect of it, of your game, because and I've never played a game that really got the nostalgia feel of an era. Well, it's never really attempted it either, but like it the way that game made me felt was, I think, the intention you're trying to go for. Like I think you did a perfect job of trying to make the player feel like this is the aesthetic, this is the whole feel of what it was like to grow up in 1984. Pre, well, life in the analog age, pre-digital, pre-internet, pre-Game Boy, as you mentioned in the beginning of it. Which is funny because it is a Game Boy game.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
but like I just loved that it was like a short and sweet game, because I feel like if you push it too long, I feel like since it was such a, I don't mean simplistic in a bad way, but since it was a simplistic puzzle game, I feel like that could get repetitive really easily. But it didn't. Like I actually want to go back and replay it because I can't find the one secret thing in it still.
Yeah.
I've gotten I completed the 5 hours of boredom, got everything done, and then I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't played it, but essentially it's a rainy day in Manheim, Pennsylvania, and you have to find a way to escape boredom by doing stuff around the house. And like the first thing, and this isn't that much of a spoiler, the very first thing is just picking up your room. That's the very first thing right off the bat. But then you have to go and explore the house, and find other stuff to do, find other things to occupy your time with. One thing I thought was really cool, actually, after playing your game and going back and watching some of your life in the analog age shorts, the layout of the house is how you have it in the comic too. So I'm assuming that's how the real layout of your childhood house was then.
Yeah, definitely. That it's exactly the layout of my family's house, like growing up. Well, thank you for such kind words too. Like the whole thing was born out of keeping it small. Like I didn't want to make a big game. I wanted to finish a game by myself, and I was like, what's the best way to control the scope of it? You know, and and I was like, well, I kind of like built the house just to just run around in my house from when I was a kid. Like that's kind of like why I built it to begin with. And I was like, what? There has to be a story here for this. And it's like even with Analog Age, it's kind of hard to like. When I was writing those, it was kind of hard to come up with the actual story because it's not like a long story or something, you know. And I was like, well, what if I restrict the movement only to the house, right? And then what if I can't figure out what to do? I have to find things to do in the house, and that's where the story came from. It was like this weird, like meta, like okay, I have a house, like what do I do? Like I guess you talk to people, what are they doing? Like
So
my
you
mom
designing the game was
was
the game
making
itself.
exactly, yeah, like and the room was kind of just like the way that I want to make my room, and that was like when I thought about rainy days or being at home. And
Hmm.
like my that was the first thing my mom's like, you have to clean up your room, and it's the thing that you hate the most. And I was like, that's cool to like get that done with in the beginning, you know, like
Yeah.
you're in a room, you got to pick up your stuff, you can't leave until you pick it up, and then the reward is to get to see the rest of the house, you know. So yeah, so that was the idea behind the game, you know, that's where it came from. And I'm glad that you got that part out of it, like that nostalgia out of it. It was like it's funny because I didn't really set out to do that when I was making the game, like make it feel nostalgic. I was just kind of like adapting my comic into a game, but the music and everything. The music was the hardest part, by the way, and
I believe it. If, especially like not because it's bad. I actually really like the music. Like I said, I was humming it, but like I feel like since you're an illustrator, music wouldn't be something that you would have a lot of experience with.
exactly like I'm just kind of like playing around till I get something I like, and then uh, you know, hopefully it's good enough. And that's kind of like how the music was for Life in the Agile Age shorts too. It was just like, okay, I kind of write a little ditty and it helps the story along, you know.
Hmm.
And but the conscious choice was like when I was making those shorts was to make it synth, like make it like that's kind of how I remember. Like that's the thing that it's accessible. It's really easy to do, and because I don't play any instruments, but it's also like for some reason that's how I remember my childhood. I remember this weird ethereal non
Synthwave.
specific, like you know what I mean, like your brain's filling in the gaps, you know.
Yeah,
It's same
yeah.
as NES. Like the reason I think I like NES games so much is because it was so limited, it was so like so many colors and that so many limitations that your brain kind of fills in the rest, you know.
And there's I've talked about this with musicians that I've had, with composers I've had on, but limitation a lot of times breeds creativity. So it's the same thing in a weird sense with childhood. Like you were very limited in what you could do. Like you said, you're bored on a rainy day, so your imagination just runs wild.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
I yeah, no, that really gave me that feeling of nostalgia from the 80s. And like I said, it's to bring it to kind of do a callback to what we talked about earlier. It's misplaced nostalgia for me because it's like I feel that even though I wasn't even alive in 84. I was born in 89, but like I I think the reason it kind of like resonated so much with me is because where I grew up, I actually lived in one town. I don't want to say the specific towns, but I lived in like a city like thing for like only city like area for like only 2 to 3 years. And then I lived in a very rural area after that, and that's where I've been ever since. So I actually grew up across the field from just, or across the street from just fields, like farms and fields. My uncle is a farmer, and so for a large chunk of my childhood, my mom worked at that farm as like as an accountant, and so she would go there and work during the day, and I would just have to occupy my time on the farm 4 hours, and I wasn't allowed to watch TV all the time. I wanted to, but like a good parent, my mom's like, no, you need to go outside and find something to do.
Exactly.
So it reminded me so much of my own life because of that. Like grew up on a I literally grew up on a farm, even though it wasn't my own. It was my family, it was my uncle's, and it was something where I just had to find something to do because I wasn't allowed to play. Like, we didn't really have games at the time that we owned. Like, obviously they were around, but we didn't have any video games. I wasn't allowed to watch TV all day, no matter how much I begged. So I'd have to go find stuff to do. And this game really gets that feeling, that aesthetic down like perfectly well. And what I think is cool about it is that it's short, and it's something that someone could, like, when I was playing it, I was literally laying in bed while my wife was while my wife was feeding our daughter, and I'm just kind of playing, and my wife's like, "What's that noise?" I'm like, "It's a game I'm trying." I ended up playing through it all night. It was not all night, but I ended up playing through it the whole way. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think the reason it's so short is because I'm not a fan of RPGs, and I really do love point and click adventure games like
I got
Sam and
that vibe. Yeah.
Max, and like I love all that. And Maniac Mansion on NES was like another a game I skipped too. Like, uh, I love that puzzle aspect of it. And I thought, I'm not a game designer, and I'm not like Mike is a game designer. He is a breed of person, and I am not that breed of person. Like, I'm just kind of learning and stumbling and kind of figuring out things as I go. And I do know how to tell a story. And I think games for me is like, I literally, it's another way to tell a story. Like, and I I'm the type of person that work on stuff after hours, and I have to limit my time. And so like that the next even my next game, I'm working on it right now, and I'm like thinking of like, okay, what is this game when it's done? Like, how big is it? What's the whole experience? What's the stuff I want to get in here? I don't want it to get balloon out of shape. I want to get this done in a certain amount of time. And and um and and I want to tell a really stupid, goofy story. Like, that's what I want to do with my next game. And it's gonna be, and it's fun. Like, I just, like, out of this whole experience, I never realized that games are just another way to tell a story. It's
Yeah.
like, and that's like, I don't know if I want to do. I don't know if I'm going to do another RPG, but I'd love to do another analog age cartoon. Like, maybe, it's like, I'd love to do an analog age cartoon that's a bunch of different genres in one game. I think that would be a really cool way of doing it.
What would be like an analog age platformer? Like, how would you have you thought about, or is that what you're working on? Maybe.
That's not. I'm working on a platformer, but it's not analog age.
Okay.
If I did analog age, I would try to everything that happened in that game happened to me in real life, right? So like, in there you make, I'm going to spoil it for people, but you like make a house for a worm out of Legos. And I did that as a kid, and like, I remember finding a worm and building a house for the worm out of
All I could
Legos
think of
and
that whole
putting it
time was
in
that
the
poor
sun porch.
worm.
Yeah, putting it in the sun porch, and the next, going to sleep, I put dirt in there and
Okay.
water, and I went to sleep and woke up, and there was a shriveled up worm in the Lego house. Because I didn't realize that it was in the sun porch, and it just like cooked the worm. And I didn't put that part of it in the game, but like,
Thank
I
God.
thought it was really unique to like, I don't know any other kid that built a Lego house for a worm.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so that's why I put that in the game. And like, going into the basement that was dark, that's all true. Like, that house that I illustrated, I swear to God, it was haunted. Like, that might be another great way to do a platformer or a Halloween themed analog gauge game or something, a horror game, but analog
Yeah,
gauge, which would
yeah.
be cool. And my brother had creepy stuff. I kind of touched a little bit of that in this game, but talking now, like, there's a bunch of weird stuff that happened to both of us in that house, like weird experiences and stuff, because it was a really old turn of the century farmhouse. It was like built in the 1860s, and
Okay.
it had like a basement and a sub basement, like underneath the basement that is
Okay.
in the game. It was like this. They had I forget what they're called, a cistern. They had a cistern underneath there that would collect the rainwater, and then it would pump it back up, and you would use that water like in the house.
Okay.
Um, and it was like, I didn't even know that was there the whole time I was living there. And then when we went to move out, my dad's like, "Oh, I got to go check on the other basement." And I'm like, "The other basement?" And he like pulls the
That was loud.
rug that's in the game that's underneath like the laundry room. He pulled the rug out, and like, there's a trap door there, and he went down into the cistern. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I didn't know this was here, and I've been living in this house for like 10 years.
Is your childhood home still standing too?
It is, but they really, even when we were there, we added a whole addition and kind of modernized it.
Hmm.
My dad was handy, like in the cartoons, like he built a he built a hot tub for us out of a water tower. I did a whole
I love
short
that
about
video
that.
so much.
Oh, thanks. And I didn't really know how unique that was as a kid until like, I mean, I kind of did, but didn't really realize it until I was actually sat down. I was like, okay, my dad was a hippie, which is weird. That's not every kid. And then he built the stuff. So he bought the house at an auction from a farmer, and built and like stayed in the house before I even knew him. And he built the house with his friend from college. Like they totally redid the whole house.
Oh wow.
And then in the meantime, my mom got a divorce and then met him, and then his friend moved out of the house, and then we moved in as a family into that house, and that's the history of that house. It's just a weird history. And then when I went into junior high, we moved out, and that's why like there's like these weird points in my life that are kind of sectioned off. Like there's this like, okay, in this house was my kind of like before junior high, like grade school is all this house, and then after grade school and junior high and high school is this house, and then after high school was like college, and after college was California. It's like, but there's these things. That's why I love to draw that house. I have such like strong nostalgia for that house, the way it was laid out. My brother literally slept in a coat closet, so that's why like you go into the room and you come out and you walk right into that the clothes that are hanging there, and it says
Is
smells like old people.
I was
Because
wondering what that was.
yeah, my mom would hang like old clothes there that she had, like I don't
Okay.
know, like as a kid, like her high school jacket and stuff was there, and like kind of stank a little bit. I'm sorry you're listening to this, mom, but it was kind of stinky. And that's why I put that in the game. Like I just love to put all these things that make it unique, like
No,
especially looking for the toy under the sofa. Like that stuff happened all the time. Go pick up your toys. I'm like, I don't see anything. Like I don't, it's always like
moms,
underneath
man, they
something,
have
or
eyes in
like,
the back of their head and
yeah,
on all over the
exactly.
place. It well, and you saying it was a haunted just it weirds me out a little bit, not in like a bad way, but like because then I remember your one short about the weird head in the window that it was just a silhouette. You didn't see the face. I'm like, oh God, that's creepy.
Yeah, I still can't explain it to this day. Like it was like one of the scaredest I ever was my whole life was that night, and it was weird. And I tried to touch on it. I did another segment or short too, it was called Missing Spaces, because I had an assignment in school where you had to draw your layout of your house, and I went to draw the layout of the house, and I'm like, well, what's here? This doesn't. There's a section right here that's, yeah, I know this is cabinets, but like what's right here? What's this little space? And it was just like weird parts of the house that were just unfinished, or like weird secret passages. Of course, my dad knew because he kind of like built it from the ground up, but I think he
Yeah,
just kind of like, well, I'm not going to deal with that, so let's just not use that space.
I gotcha.
Yeah, and when you go down in the game and you go down in the basement and it's dark, that whole half of like my dad had his workshop there, but the whole rest of that side of the house was all dirt. There wasn't anything there. It was just dirt.
Oh, I was wondering why I couldn't light up the second half of the basement. So
There's nothing there.
there's
Like
no,
there was literally nothing there. That's, you find, I was like, that's the perfect place to find a worm. So, and
and
we had,
I
go
liked
ahead.
that the cat was kind of like a way to guide the player through if you weren't quite sure where to go. I noticed that where like if you followed the cat, you would find the different tasks that you had to do, and the cat is how you find the worm.
Yeah, what I did is like I basically, the way I made the game is I figured out the layout, then I figured out the characters, and I figured out where they would be, and then I came up with different quests. Like any RPG, you have quests. I wanted to make it non-linear, so you could do it completely out of order. But making the game, like I didn't realize that that's freaking impossible. Like it's hard. It's all math, because I had to build all these dialogue trees, and it didn't make any sense because my dad would be in the basement, and then he needed to get upstairs to start the Vic 20 to do the Vic 20 thing. And it was like, so I had, at one point I had all the quests working that you could do in all out of order,
Mhm.
but it didn't work. Like functionally it didn't work. It was like it's making a game that's almost like 49 outcomes instead of like 7 outcomes. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah,
It and
yeah.
and I was like, I gotta like make phases. I have to like say this is the first phase of the game, the second phase of the game, the third phase of the game. And then these quests you do the first phase, these quests you do the second phase, these quests you do the third phase. And then there's like a bonus thing when you get all 3 secrets too, which you haven't gotten to yet, which I'm
Yeah,
excited to see what you think.
I got two out of the three. I think I know what the third one is. And spoiler alert, because I just want to confirm with the dev right here if I'm right. Is the I shouldn't say isn't the third secret because it's not like there's a specific order. Um, is one of the secrets getting to watch your favorite TV show?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, I know how to do it, but I ran into a glitch where I like dad wasn't leaving the basement. He just stayed there. I don't remember how I got into that state, so I'm of no help to you right now. Um,
Uh,
because as a designer, you would have to know what I did in the order that I did it to get to that state. But dad, he was like, "All right, we fixed the TV guide stand. Let's go up and use it." And then he would just never leave the basement. So
uh,
I was trying to figure out. I was like, "All right,
hmm.
I'm just gonna have to replay it and do it again because I couldn't."
I'll look into that.
I
That
don't even remember exact. I think it's because I was like once because I had already beaten the game once, so I knew where to go. And so once I started going through the game, I was doing things too early, and then I think it like flipped switches in the wrong way. I don't know. I'd have to. I'll see if I can recreate it, and then I will write down every step I do, and then I can email it to you.
I will go out of my way to fix it. Like there's like the Space Invaders thing is another thing that people had a lot of trouble with. I like that was so hard to figure out how to even make like Space Invaders work because I had to like hard code where the player moves. It's not like
Yeah.
fluid, and it's a total cheat. Like you can't do projectiles in Game Boy Studio. It doesn't exist
Okay.
in that version. So it's all cheated. It's all like if you are in this place and you don't hit the fire button fast enough, it generates a number between 1 and 4, and if it's 4, then there's nothing you can do. You're being shot at and you get killed. So it's not
Okay.
even like skill based. It's just like just by chance. And so I had to go through and tweak all those. I have to still have to go back and make it easier because people still have trouble beating that part.
I had a hard time with it too, but I was able to finagle my way through, figure it out.
Oh,
Um,
good. I'm good. I'm
but
glad.
All right, so we've been going on for a little bit, so I want to wrap up with this. Let's talk about Animaniacs for a little bit. We'll talk about
Sure.
Animaniacs, and we'll talk about your work as an animator, as a professional animator or an animation producer. So you've worked for two of the biggest animation houses, period, Warner Brothers and Nickelodeon.
Hmm.
And you did the Kung Fu Panda TV show. Now, how did you get involved with Nickelodeon? I guess because I actually saw some of your earliest credits too were over on Cartoon Network with Dexter's Lab, and you actually wrote, I believe, one of the shorts for that too.
Hmm.
So I guess you went from. I guess let's just go through real pretty quickly. Like, what was your first professional industry job, and then up to now with Animaniacs. So I mean, we don't want to like go into crazy detail because we've been going for a little bit, but let's
Okay, I'll make it brief. I started, moved up to California. I went to a really crappy school there. Well, it wasn't crappy, but it was like tiny.
mhm.
And I started as an intern at Spumco with John Kay. So at that point, I was like, this is I've met
You've
my
made where you wanted
idol.
to go.
I don't know what to do after this, right? So the way animation works is it's project to project. So we ran out of projects at Spumco, and I started just working wherever I could find work. And the way animation works is like it's kind of like who you know. You become friends with whoever's at the studio you're at, and then like you call them up to see, hey man, do you know any more work anywhere? At least that's how it was back in the day, and that's how I kind of went to different studios. So I went
Okay.
from there. I went from Swimco. I went to I did some work at Saban, which was
Like Heim Saban, like the Power
Haim
Rangers.
Saban. They were
Yeah,
doing
okay.
this primetime show that was really not good called Pigs Next Door. At the same time, I got
I
to
can remember
know
that
people
actually.
that were at Cartoon Network. So that's how I landed like some work at Cartoon Network. Meanwhile, still going back to Spumco. And then the work dried up again at Spumco, and that's how I ended up at Warner Brothers because some people that worked under me, because I was directing at the time, got jobs on Mucha Lucha, which is a
Okay.
game, which is a cartoon Flash cartoon because we were doing Flash cartoons at Spumco. So I got hired on that, and then from there went to Disney because I did a comic. They wanted to do a, um, a pilot based on my comic, so I got to know people at Disney. Went to Disney. That's where I met Jorge Gutierrez. He's the guy who created El Tigre and the Book of Life.
Okay.
He's actually my brother-in-law. That's a whole other story, but he's awesome, and so from there we went to Nickelodeon because he sold a show at Nickelodeon, so he brought me in to work on that, and that's how I got at Nickelodeon. I did some freelance before that on Cat Scratch and My Life as a Teenage Robot. I did a board for that too. And so while I was at Nickelodeon, I worked basically on 4 shows, but it was like 14 years of work. Like it was LT Gray, and then I went into CG. So I did Penguins of Madagascar. I directed on that.
Okay.
And then went to Kung Fu Panda. And then from Kung Fu Panda, that's where I finally got to a producer. And then from Kung Fu Panda, DreamWorks Animation was starting up. They wanted me to go to DreamWorks, and I said, I really don't want to go to DreamWorks. I've worked on Penguins and Panda. I'd really want to work on my own stuff. So
Yeah.
luckily, I had fans of the higher up at Nickelodeon. They said, we'll bring you in an overall. So I was in development at Nickelodeon in my overall deal. And then from there, the executives left and went to go work at Warner Brothers. And so that's one of the executives was Audrey Deal. And then she brought me in to work on Animaniacs. So that's how I finally got to Animaniacs, because we always wanted to do a show together. We were always in development together. We developed a bunch of stuff, but never went to series. And this was the first time where she landed a series. And then she called me up because she knew I was a big, like, I have the Spumco past. I have all the Looney Tunes training, basically,
Yeah.
and 2D experience. So she brought me in to do Animaniacs. And I said no like 3 times to the show. I was scared. Like I didn't think I was worth it because I wasn't like there's people in animation that might not be as they might not be as experienced as me, but they're huge Animaniacs fans, like
Yeah.
crazy, like diehard crazy Animaniacs fans. And I was like, they should be doing the show, not me, you know. And Audrey convinced me. She's like, look, you are bringing like an objective view to
I
this. Like
was
it's
I was
not.
gonna say, I'm like, it's almost better to have that, because if you're too close to the work, then it's hard to separate things that probably should get cut just because you're so attached to what you know of it.
Yeah, and having that outsider look to it too. Like I always forever I love Muppet Show. I love Monty Python. I love Looney Tunes. I like all these things that have a bunch of little things in it, right? Like a variety show. And I always want to do a variety show, and I've pitched it so many times as a series, and it's so hard to get going because it's hard enough just to get one show sold, let alone like 6 mini shows in a show, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, Animaniacs, perfect. Like this is the one time I'll get to do it. It's like the finally get to make a variety show, and it's a built-in. It's already exists, and it's like I get to do it, you know. And so I met Wellesley Wild, who is the executive producer on the show. He was brought in first because he wrote a really cool essay of like how I would do Animaniacs, right? And
Hmm.
so he was brought in, and they really loved him. They signed off on him first, and then I was brought in to meet everyone at Amblin, who was like, you know, right at, like the presidents of Amblin and stuff. Did an interview with there, and that's where I met Wellesley, and we were kind of talking, and we're just like, you know, we kind of shared the same opinions about the show, and we had the same tastes, so it was perfect. He's like a brother who I never grew up with, but we kind of like just clicked, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and making the show is just like we trust each other, and we're both on kind of different sides of making it, but we also like we can't do it without each other, you
Hmm.
know. And that's just animation's collaborative, and when you meet that kind of collaboration, it's like it's perfect, you know.
And especially with that cast of, I mean, just thinking about it, like, I feel like with almost any show that's a huge hit or that develops a cult following, there has to be chemistry firing on all cylinders across the board, not just behind the scenes, but also obviously the voice acting performances like that. I mean, that cast is legendary. You know, Rob Paulson, Tress McNeil, um,
Jess
Maurice LaMarche,
Harnell,
Jess Harnell, like all
yep.
those guys, all those voice actors are legendary. And then you even go back to, I remember this is probably a decade ago now. Did you ever watch the YouTube, not YouTube, the internet? Well, he's on YouTube now, but the Nostalgia Critic, any of his videos? You ever heard of him?
No.
So the Nostalgia Critic, he's kind of up there with the Angry Video Game Nerd in terms of that style where his whole slogan is "I'm the Nostalgia Critic. I remember it, so you don't have to." And it's
Oh,
basically
that's
he
cool.
goes back and he watches bad movies or bad TV shows. But he did a whole thing where he got all of the original producers of Animaniacs together and did like a whole. It was like a 4-part series of just interviews with, I think, some of the voice actors as well, but it was a lot of the producers of the show.
Yeah, the show itself, it has a really cool history. Like you, I was a little too old for Animaniacs, and I like Tiny Toons because it was like Spielberg and it was like full animation on Saturday morning and or on weekdays, and it looked really cool. And all those people wanted to make another show, but they kind of didn't know what they were going to make afterwards. So this is what I understand about what happened, right? They went off for almost a year and just pitched a bunch of ideas, and they kind of just worked on a bunch of stuff. And they went to Steven. They said, "Here's all our ideas," and it kind of all those ideas kind of came together into Animaniacs.
Okay.
Like it's a cool history. And I worked with Peter Hastings, who was one of the main writers and creator of Pinky and the Brain. Like I worked with him at Warner Brothers on Mucha Lucha, and then later on Kung Fu Panda, and they were groundlings. They were just brought in because they're the groundlings. They just like the whole original cast of that show basically was like writers who could do voices, kind of like Saturday Night Live, and like Peter Hastings would write certain ones, and like they were kind of in charge of like their own kind of little pods, you know. And when we were doing the show, it was like, oh well, we want to pay homage to all this stuff. Like we want to be honorable, but we also want to kind of do our own thing. And it didn't feel right to like. I mean, it was decided that we weren't going to be doing like certain characters, and it wasn't right to do those characters without the people who created those characters. You know what I mean?
Well, I feel like I was actually looking up some of your other interviews that you did with like I forget what I saw it on YouTube though, but some of the other interviews you've done about Animaniacs, and like walking that line must have been so difficult. And like you were saying, you were nervous to get on the project. I feel like that has to be the reason, right? Like just trying to find that line of that balancing act of paying homage, but making it, updating it and making it original and yours, but at the same time you don't want to alienate the former fans and still bring in new fans. It's just when people are able to do that, it's very difficult and it's very rare. And I'm not saying this to blow smoke up your ass. I think you guys nailed it.
Well,
And
I think that we can't take all the credit. Honestly, Steven Spielberg was really, really, really involved, and I personally had to pitch to him a couple times, and it was terrifying.
I believe it.
He definitely has like this is what Animaniacs is, and he was the one who really kept. He was like our North Star. Like he was the one who said like this is like we would pitch a bunch of stuff, and he'd go, try it, and then if I don't like it, and then he would kill it. There was a bunch of stuff that just ended. He just didn't like it, and it was a good thing. Like I really do think that he was like the driving force, like the guy who would like really like kind of pull it all together for us. And I mean, the other thing that helped a lot with doing Animaniacs is I'm a huge Looney Tunes fan, and I'm a huge like fan of full animation and cartoony stuff, right?
Yes.
And so when I went and looked at the show, I was like, I'm gonna go back to see what those guys were looking at. Like, what was their influence? Like, why was it like it's Marx Brothers, it's Chuck Jones, it's there's specific references in those cartoons, and like I brought on an art director who worked with the guy who did all like the Looney Tunes backgrounds for Chuck Jones was Maurice Noble, right? And he kind of trained these groups of guys like in the 90s and 2000s.
Okay.
They're called the Noble Boys, right? And the art director Roman Laney, he's definitely like 1 inch away from being a Noble Boy. Like he's perfect for art direction. We got that, right?
Okay.
And then I met Genevieve Tsai she's the character designer. She's like total diamond in the rough. She's worked on games and that kind of stuff, but her style is like perfect for Animaniacs. So I put her in charge of like, let's figure out like the look. And then going back and looking at the Japanese stuff, because I'm a big Japanese fan too, like looking at the specific Japanese episodes. I was like, that's that. Once we started art wise, we cracked those nuts. It was it was like super simple and like an easy way to move forward because we knew that we were in the exact DNA of what the original show was, like what they liked, going back and studying that stuff and being experts on like, Looney Tunes and all that, like, and funny animation and like good timing and funny expressions and like with the Spumco stuff and everything like that, all that stuff played into this, and I think I think it shows. I really do think it shows in the show,
It probably helps. I'm getting a vibe from you that you're also like a really big animation nerd, obviously, because you work in animation, but also the historical aspects of it. Like you really love learning about the history of animation and how it started and where it is now. So I would assume that probably helped a lot, and also probably made it a lot more fun having to do more research on something you're already passionate about. You know?
I mean, I went back and I did a deep dive in the original show, just Animaniacs history, and we had access to like all the pitch documents for all the original
Oh
shows that they
wow.
showed to Spielberg, and going back and looking at how they thought about the characters and how they structured all that stuff. And then also I got my a friend put me in touch with one of the animators from TMS, the Tokyo Movie Shin, the studio that animated Animaniacs,
Hmm.
the favorite episodes, or the best, in my opinion, the best animated episodes, right? I got to talk directly to him and ask questions through a translator, like what was it like, and ask very specific questions, like what was your approach for timing? How come your the characters look different than what they did in other episodes and stuff? And through that, I was like, we should base our production model and style on more on like what they were doing, not so much what Warner Brothers was doing.
That
You know what
makes
I mean?
sense.
Like the Japanese were basically throwing away all the model sheets and all the timing. They were just doing their own thing. And as once we figured that out, it's like, okay, now I get it. Because I would look at like behind the scenes footage of the guys here fixing animation, and I'm like, that's not what's on screen. That's not what TMS is doing. So like just learning that was like another breakthrough. I was like,
Okay.
okay, now we can if we go in this direction, we're doing the best of the best. We're doing the best of what the show could be, and that's like kind of distilling it down to its like essence, you know?
I think that's one of the most unknown aspects to the casual viewer about animation is how so much of it is outsourced from the company. Like it's not like I mean, you would obviously know much more than I would, but like how much of animation is even done in house anymore by the company that's commissioning the work well, commissioning would imply that you're outsourcing, but like how much animation is done in house anymore? Is it all outsourced? Is the majority outsourced now?
Well, it's interesting because like animation to make a show, right? To make an Animaniacs episode, right, is about, as a producer, I'm putting on my producer hat right now.
Yeah.
I think it's like 54 to 56 weeks per episode. That's over a year to make one episode, right? And out of those 50s, I think it's closer to 60 actually. I gotta look at the schedule, but uh, 20 weeks of that, 4 months is or 5 months is animation, just animation, right? All the rest of it is writing, storyboards, animatics, design, right? All that's pre-production. Then there's animation, and then there's post-production. So post-production is like uh, doing the fixes, doing all the sound, and doing all the color, right?
Yeah.
Color fixes, and then mixing everything together, bringing it all together at the end. So out of that whole time, like the 20 weeks is only 20 weeks of it is actually animating and making it move, right? And that 20 weeks is always an overseas studio because labor is so expensive in the states. But since we were such a big we were such a big studio, and we knew we'd be working with some studios that might not get jokes, or Steven is very, very strict about trying to make it as full, as many drawings as we can per second.
Which
We would,
definitely raises the
we
price.
exactly. We had an in-house animation team of about 6 to 7 people that would come in and do fixes at the end. So to answer your question, like most of the animation on most shows is all done overseas or out of the main studio, but all the pre-production, which is like all the heavy duty lifting and making packages to set up the studio just to come in and animate, pull everything together, and then send that footage back to us. Like that's all done out of house, you know?
That's crazy. I mean, it's just something that like you don't that the casual viewer just doesn't. You wouldn't know like because the way I know animation is how Looney Tunes was back in the 40s and 50s, where it was all done in house. It was all done by people, just and they weren't paid like anything because it was back in the 40s and 50s, and they didn't care that much about it.
It's
And
the same production model though. Like we do traditional animation. It's just we use digital tools. It's exactly I mean, making Looney Tunes and making Animaniacs is kind of the same thing. It's still you got to sit down and you have to draw the characters 100 times to make them move. There's no digital shortcuts. I mean, there are now in animation, but for specifically for Animaniacs, we went out of our way to make sure it's like
So
fully
it's
full animation,
wow.
traditional animation. And out of all of our studios, there was a couple studios that would use like library and stock heads and that kind of stuff. But I made sure that if it was in there, that they have to trick me. Like if you could trick me into not seeing your tricks,
Then
then the
you're a
audience will
really
never
good
see it.
animator. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the audience will never see it. And Spielberg, hopefully, Steven would never see it either, you know? So, and it worked. Almost, I'd say about 90% of all our animation is all traditional, and about 10% of it is very, very clever uses of like library and rigs and stuff like that for the
Okay.
characters.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one more animation related question for you, and it might be quick, who knows? But if not, it'll be interesting to me. What is more difficult, traditional, maybe not traditional, but 2D animation, traditional or otherwise, or 3D?
I think um,
I mean, that could be an opinion question too. I guess some people, obviously, you have preferences. I would assume you like 2D animation a lot more, but
I like both. Like personally, I like
okay,
both because
okay,
I um, I really liked Kung Fu Panda. Like the only reason I even worked on Kung Fu Panda is because I liked the movie so much, right? And I thought it was really heartfelt. It was really funny, and it felt really epic, you know. And with CG, like that's the one thing you can really do with CG. It's like photorealistic, and it's like it's very lush, and it's really that's like the advantage you have with CG. You know, like it's like photorealistic. It's like playing with toys or something, right?
yeah.
In 2D, the advantage you have is all the stylization, all the artistic merit. It's like anything you can draw can be moved. You know what I mean? Like so that's at anything. Like CG is still like um, there are outlying weird styles for CG. It's definitely moving more like stylized, which is cool, like a lot more diverse. But like it's still in it's still like people there's not a lot of really stylized CG stuff that's really
I feel
popular.
like it's
You know what I
hard to
mean?
do because when you stylize a CG character, it's a lot harder to pull off aesthetically. I don't know. Maybe that's just an opinion. Maybe that's just my opinion, I should say. But like, whenever you see like a good example is like whenever you see like anime characters that are in 3D or CG, it doesn't always look that great. You have to you have to heavily stylize that CG. You almost have to cell shade it to a degree
Yeah.
to like
I mean, a
make it
cool,
look good.
like one of the coolest, in my opinion, one of the coolest like 2D or CG things is Into the Spider Verse. I love that they leaned into the 2D aspect as far as like not animating it all on ones and or 30 frames a second. It's just cool. It's just cool. It was really stylized. I was waiting for that to happen for so long, and I was glad to see that something of that hit really big because there. I hope that pushes CG more into like the stylized area. As far as TV is concerned, 2D is still hard. I think is still harder because there's just more steps. CG, it depends on how you build the show. Like it could be harder or it could be easier. I mean, it's kind of how you set up the production,
Mhm.
but they both have their kind of plus and minuses. You know?
I guess that makes because with CG you could create a model and then just let that model like you can do a lot more. It's a lot faster to move that model because you already have that model made versus in 2D you would have to redraw it every time, right?
Yeah, but then you also have the disadvantage that you can't have a million models in CG. In 2D, you could whatever you draw could go on the show. I mean, you can't have a million models either in 2D, but like you can have a lot more. You can go a lot more
Yeah.
places. You could do a lot more things in 2D. Like, there's no way if we made this show like Animaniacs in CG, it would be like 5 times the cost because to build everything would be insane. Like it'd be completely insane to me. You
That's
know?
so interesting to know.
Yeah.
All right. So my last question for you, and it has nothing to do with anything we've talked about, is a question from Courtney. So
Okay.
a segment that I do that I've been trying to keep up with is a question from my wife. I tell her who I'm speaking to and a little bit about the guest, but then she asks a question that usually has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So when you go to an amusement park, which is the ride you ride first? Which is the first ride you go to?
First ride I go to. I like roller coasters.
The roller
Like I
coaster.
still love
Okay.
roller coasters, but I get kind of sick on rides sometimes. So I like to kind of work my way up to the big one. So whatever the least like crazy roller coaster would be the first one. Like if I was going to Disneyland, I would ride I don't know, the Matterhorn or something. That's not as
Okay.
crazy as like Space Mountain
Yeah, yeah.
or something else. So
Did you go to Hershey Park when you were a kid at all?
yes, I loved
Okay.
Hershey Park. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had like the Super Duper Looper, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
nowadays it's kind of like the baby one, but when I was a kid, that was I think it was built maybe I don't know. When I went there, it was built maybe like 10 years before that, and it was still the big thing.
It's funny because it's just one loop, and that's
But there
all
was
it.
no other loops. I
Yeah,
mean, like back in the day, there was no other. Like, how many roller coasters went upside down?
I know, right? And now they have those. I mean, I haven't been to an amusement park in years, but I remember when like Top Thrill Dragster came out in like Cedar Point, Ohio. That's the one that does like 0 to 80 in like 3 seconds, and it shoots you up and at 400 feet in the air. I'm like, not a fan of that. I'm afraid of heights. I can't do that, fam. It's too
I
much.
My favorite ride at Hershey Park is the Comet. I don't know if you.
Yes,
It's like
yes.
a wooden roller coaster, and isn't that the one that? Yeah, that's I love that roller coaster because I love wooden roller coasters because they're kind of janky and
They're a
scary.
little, yeah, they're rickety. You're
Like
not
you're in it,
sure.
you can feel it moving a little bit. I love that. That's why people don't like it. I love it. I think it's great.
That's funny. That's funny. All right. So that's all I had for you. This was a long, but this is one of the most fun episodes I've done.
I'm sorry.
So,
I have a
dude,
tendency of
no,
rambling. I'm sorry.
dude, I'm the same way. It's no problem at all. I really enjoyed this. So where can the good people find you online? And is there anything you'd like to promote? Obviously, Animaniacs. There is a second season coming out at some point, I believe, right?
Yep, second season. We're working on second season right now, and that'll hit later this year. So look forward to that. I am actually launching a Patreon
Okay.
because I'm trying to. I mean, by now, I mean this will be April. It'll be launched by then, but like I'm working on a new game, and I'm trying to share the process as I go along because I'm not that's why it's kind of hard for you to kind of find information for me. I'm not good at documenting as I do it. So I'm trying to make a really big effort to document my process as I make things. And that's what I'm trying to do with the new game. So, you could follow me, go to my Patreon, or you can find me on Instagram, Gabe Swarr. Just do a Google search for me. And then, I'm on Twitter too, Gabe. I think it's .Swarr underscore Swarr. I don't remember.
I can look it up right now. It's underscore.
Yeah, underscore Gabe underscore Swarr. So you can find me there, and I'm trying to make a new Game Boy game in time for the analog pocket because I have one on order,
Oh,
and
I'm
I
so
want to play my
jealous.
own game on my analog pocket.
That would
That's
be
my goal,
fantastic.
and I want to do a platformer. So that's what I'm doing next is a platformer. So
I'm excited to see it. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to reach out to me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that in a number of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and consider giving some dollars. I don't know. I fumbled my words there, but even just $1 a month will help grow the show. As of now, I honestly really need to rework my tiers because I don't think anyone who is giving is getting enough. So I need to figure out something for that. I need to figure out better tiers. But honestly, the best way to support the show is just give it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use that helps more people find the show. And the most important shout out I have is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of children receiving inpatient care at children's hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that will do it for this episode of the Still Loading podcast. Gabe, seriously, thank you so much for joining me. This was a lot
well,
of fun.
thanks for having me. This has been great.
And that will do it. I will see you all next time.